we can get these developers who used to write sort of stuff. They used to do APIs for the things that Vonage did, and we can get those to now
sort of pivot to
5G enterprise stuff. And then if that happens, then we can make some money. Because
so the thinking is that these developers write bits of software that enable, let's say, an agricultural or a transport logistics or a heavy industry company to sort of tap into networks and do clever shit.
Exactly.
But that's a big jump, isn't it? It's a big leap of faith.
Totally big jump.
That's going to happen. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Second one from our lovely new grey felt studio.
I'm colour coordinated today as well.
Yeah, you're wearing a t-shirt I haven't seen for a while. I was mortified to hear that one of the reasons you haven't worn it for a while is because I took the piss out of it so much last time.
You and Paul Nolan at CC Group laid into it one time in Barcelona, put me off wearing it for about 3 years.
You mustn't let the shit that comes out of my mouth
it doesn't look like
ever affect your thoughts on anything.
I can barely see you, like well camouflaged.
Storm or something.
Yeah, it does, because there is a type of camouflage that isn't your classic khaki.
Yeah.
Is that more of a desert thing?
This is more of an Iraq posting.
No, that looks more like in the mountains to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, they've got mountains in Iraq, haven't they?
Arctic.
Yeah.
Oh, Arctic. You're thinking more sort of winter soldier, sort of Finnish sniper type of thing. Anyway, it looks fine. And
well, it's all right.
It's just
it was the first one I could find that was clean.
There we go.
A lot of stuff was in
so
the
I know how you agonise over what to wear on the pod.
Yeah.
Do you know the only thing I do is I do sometimes have a look. I have a look at past pods, and like I don't want to wear this GNR t-shirt for like 2 weeks running.
You're trying.
Pierre's
trying to read the label.
What does
I have no
say?
idea.
It
it's
says
probably the branding.
Thoughts. We used to hang around, right?
Oh right, I've never even seen that. We used to hang around all day long, not knowing what to do. But soon we understood that I can't read the last bit; it's too small.
What a strange,
really small.
What a strange thing to have written on your t-shirt.
That's so bizarre.
Yes,
it's not like some slogan.
I just thought it was like a bit of branding,
like just do it or something. It's just some random musing.
You've never bothered reading it.
Yeah, some writing.
It's camouflage, isn't it?
You just saw it now.
So yeah, that's the only time I agonise is I don't want to wear the same metal t-shirt 2 weeks in a row.
No,
but that's it really. So we don't have any sort of bribes or events to talk about this week. I do have...
well, it's getting on to summer, isn't it? Everybody's away.
I was waiting, talking about summer. Lovely day today. But it's going to... We've had
drifting already?
Yeah, you're drifting already.
I can't be. I've not definitely not moved.
Okay.
Drifting what? Out of the frame of the camera?
I sort of revolve around the table like a Huawei chairman.
Yeah.
Well, I'm...
You should change your job title to revolving editor.
Actually, the chair swivels, so you could do that.
Swiveling editor.
Swiveling editor.
Swiveling CEO. Yeah, that's a good
yeah, we've got... so we're recording this on Friday the... Whatever it is, 15th, is it?
As long as it's not the 13th. Yeah, it is the 15th.
And apparently we've got an unprecedented red warning.
Red heat warning.
Yeah, so we have a sort of traffic light system of warnings.
It's the first ever red heat warning.
I think about Arnie.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
We're going to sweat our asses off. It's going to be 40 degrees on Monday.
I bet it isn't. I bet it misses 40 degrees, and then everybody goes, "Oh, really? We wanted to try and."
Well, it's going to be hot as a mofo. Yeah. The thing about it is, I mean, like you hear, like we've got colleagues like Phil, the editor of Light Reading, lives in Texas, and they get crazy heat all the time there, don't they?
Yeah,
so they're not sympathetic.
Along with the world's population who live around the equator.
Well, quite.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as...
But it happens in England.
Along with probably the majority of the population of the world.
Yeah.
But
Texas is nowhere near the equator, though.
No, but he's saying as well as Texans.
Then you're really screwed, aren't you? All year round, more or less.
Yeah.
Texas isn't even in the tropics. Where's the Tropic of Cancer start?
It's like...
Is that Mexico?
Ecuador.
No, that's the actual equator. I'm talking about... if tropical is supposed to be between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, isn't it?
I don't know. Good question.
Anyway... but the thing is, England's not cut out for it. Our houses aren't airy. You know, we don't have these sort of haciendas with open terraces and shit like that. We've got insulation. That's what
we've got a large percentage of moaning people as well.
God, we do like a moan about the weather.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a cliche, but for a good reason.
Yeah, so now the government's moaning on our behalf. Like,
well, they're more than moaning. They're basically going, watch out or you're fucking dead, mate.
Yeah.
It's like, it seems like a slight overreaction. I mean, you want to watch out. Like, my dad's getting on. I want to make sure he's got plenty of water and fans and he's being careful. But, you know, it's just a bit
should be
hot.
Right, as long as he's not running up a mountain or something. Then.
No, if he ever had them, my dad's mountain running days are behind him. So that'll be fun. So we can reflect on that next week.
Well, we might be able to reflect on it midweek if we come out for some social do's during the week.
That's true, yeah. No, I was talking about for the purpose of our pod, people. Because we're being recorded, you see, other people listen to this.
No, but we can talk about it on the pod next week.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, isn't it? Yeah. So that's that. What else is there to talk about? No bribes, sadly. He said soliciting. Suddenly our compliance people are like, look, we've put up with this shit for a while, now he's crossed the line. One fun thing to chat about, I had a bit of a Twitter interaction with a former podcast guest, Danielle Royston, who, in acknowledgement of her fairly entrenched position on public cloud, actually brought cheerleader gear into the pod. So she's a public cloud cheerleader, and fair play to her, she was sort of lampooning that label that perhaps we'd given her. But she also acts it out, and I wrote a story. It's not going to be an item that we talk about on the pod mainly, but I wrote an item about Deutsche Telekom has basically got even more in bed with Google Cloud on a bunch of sort of core network stuff, I think.
Yeah, trials at the moment.
Trials of core network stuff. Yeah. And I just wrote it up, and I did a straight write-up, and then we always finish off with a paragraph or two of analysis, and I just went, okay, that's all well and good, but it's our standard line on public cloud. You're handing over more and more control over your shit to a third party, and maybe that won't be an unalloyed good.
I'd be very surprised personally if they were an operator that did put the whole of their core into the public cloud. And because there's not very few that have done that. There's one greenfield player that we know about, Dish.
Yeah.
And there's one big operator that's AT&T. But AT&T is a US company, so putting its core into the public cloud of another US company is perhaps less of a worry anyway. With all of Europe's concerns about where data sovereignty and all this sort of stuff, and then the sort of slight pushback against big tech anyway in the region, which Deutsche Telekom's own CEO has moaned about a few times.
Quite.
I find it very hard to think that they would do something like that. So these trials, I suspect, they could do something like putting, some IoT services perhaps, using the public cloud for that.
And as you say, these are trials. But the way they,
having said that, they did just flog their towers this week, which I think is another dodgy move personally.
Yeah, so they're obviously in the mood to just relinquish control over their own shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not going to get into it because this isn't a whole segment, but one quote, a quote from the thing is that between them they're going to define a joint roadmap for the telecommunications industry, which sounds like a fairly broad agenda.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Anyway, and I just sort of went, yeah, okay, fair enough, you're going to do all this, a few quotes from them saying what a great idea it is. And then my concluding paragraph, I just had our usual thing about how, I'm sure it does offer a lot. I mean, I don't doubt, we've had public cloud chats like with Erland, where I don't doubt that there are many things that operators can get from partnership with public cloud people that they either couldn't at all, or couldn't at scale, or couldn't, or do it much more cheaply or much more efficiently.
Do you know what I think though? I think that these company CEOs like Timotheus Hertges or whatever he's called, the Deutsche Telekom's
your
boss,
German doesn't let you down.
They're not. They don't think they're incentivized to think about what's good for the profit and loss statement and what's good for shareholders in terms of returns.
Yeah.
And they're not incentivized to think...
But in the short term.
In the short term as well. So they're not thinking long term, if all networks go this way and we have dependency on a small number of public clouds, is there a situation then that isn't particularly good? Which is probably going to be something that happens in the next, let's be honest, 8, 10, 15 years.
Exactly. By which time they'll be sitting on a beach.
He'll have retired because I don't know how... He's not particularly old, I don't think, but he'll be sitting on a beach. He probably won't be the boss anymore because they only ever last 5 to 10 years, usually.
And so it's not an issue for him. It's not something that he's really going to be sitting there thinking
Quite,
about.
and this is a problem with the shareholder capitalism system. It's a problem with the democratic system. In fact, we might touch on the democratic stuff as part of the bullshit before we get cracking. Anyway, let me get to the point on this. So our mate Danielle just tweeted something, talking it up as you'd expect. She thinks it's a great idea because she's a self-confessed public cloud cheerleader. But then she goes. There are always two sides, and then in brackets, two sides capitalised with an exclamation mark, to every story. And Scott Bacino from Telecoms.com warns this is a bad move. Something to watch and come back and see who's right. Now, I'm grateful for the shout out. I'm grateful to get involved in the discussion, but she just misrepresented what I wrote. I didn't warn. There's nowhere in the piece that I said it was a bad move. All I did was say, is it going to turn out? Are you going to end up regretting handing over so much control? Anyway, I decided not to get into a sort of that's not what I said thing on Twitter. Or all I did was I linked to my story because she just linked to the press release again, which, to be fair to her, is telecom with a K.com as opposed to telecoms.com. And then someone else pitched in and sort of went, yeah, but Netflix. And I went, yeah, this phenomenon certainly isn't restricted to telecoms. I've no doubt the likes of Netflix gain a lot of benefits from the partnership with public cloud giants, but I also worry about power being concentrated in so few hands. Just to reiterate the point again.
And not just, one thing I wrote this week at the start, I actually wrote it last week, but it went up on Monday, was the thing about banking, which I think we talked about on the last podcast, so I don't want to go on about it.
Yeah, and you had that that other industry body going, hello.
Yeah, the Bank for International Settlements, which is like a major, it's like the central bank kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They had a big paper warning about cloud risks, and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, dependency on systemic risk is the word they use, of lots of financial institutions relying on a small number of US providers. It's not a
so the
healthy
risks
thing to
there.
be. And one of the things I wanted to point out in the article was that it's interesting that they're so aware of it, and I don't hear that in the telecom sector in the same way. I mean, you do.
Yeah.
When you hear it, you tend to hear it from people on the technology side, like Neil McRae, for instance. I think is probably somebody who has publicly.
He's not been afraid to voice it. Yeah.
And but you don't sort of hear regulators bringing. Regulators just make a fuss about spectrum licensing and competition and they don't get involved in this.
I started to get the impression when people like Danielle pushed back on what was just, I considered a fairly balanced statement of risks. You just get the impression that they're worried that there's this sort of irresistible momentum towards the public cloud, and they don't like anything that might interrupt it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
one of the reasons I was just going to say why I think it's such a worry compared with other suppliers, because I think she also drew a likeness to Oracle.
Well, I was just going to come on to that because it's further on the thread. So I said I worry about power being concentrated in so few hands, and then Danielle came back, as you rightly observe. She went, aren't things already in a few hands? And pointing to Oracle. Basically, and there's a sort of medium-length thread from her that I won't read out, but basically sort of pointing to the phenomenon of vendor lock-in. Is that what you were going to
because I don't think what you have with Oracle, certainly I know Oracle is now considered to be a cloud player in its own right and would provide some stuff that way, but what we're talking about, and there's still a concern there, they get grouped up with that. They're not one of the companies that has 60% collectively, 70% collectively, the big three, AWS, Google, Microsoft, but they're the next one down perhaps, outside China. But the old way of doing things is they'd sell their software and you sort of run it on premise, don't you?
Yeah.
And so there's not a fair comparison. There's not a systemic risk. If something goes down, it takes out that company. Yeah. What we've seen with outages last year is something goes down and loads of websites go offline.
And it's immediate.
And it's immediate. Yeah. And it takes down a massive chunk of...
So to steelman Danielle's position, I think she's saying that you're very reliant on Oracle. If you're all in on Oracle to run a lot of your back-end IT, then you're very reliant on them. But as you say...
But that's one outage on your on-premises software affects that company.
Indeed.
It doesn't affect dozens of companies.
No, totally. So it's a bigger risk. And anyway, to wrap it up, Danielle just sort of,
We've almost had a bonus item here, Scott, rather than just talking about drinking and.
I know. Well, it's fine. We sometimes bang on before we get onto the main items. It's just that this isn't a bit of news. That's why I chose not to do it as a main item. I suppose it is the Google thing.
We talked about the cloud last week, I suppose.
Yeah, and the week before, so we kind of done it. But And then Danielle sort of reverted to her more sort of standard mantra of how if you go into the cloud, everything will be great, which is fine. That's what she does. She's got businesses based around it.
Yeah.
But she's not a completely unbiased commentator on this.
Yeah.
And anyway, she said all this, and I went, "Oh, I guess they'll just have to take your word for it." Winky face. And then she went, "I'm not suggesting they take my word for it. I'm suggesting telcos read the terms of service like normal business people, and if they can't or don't want to adhere to them, then they shouldn't move work to the public cloud." And it's like, well, if that's your point, then we got no fucking argument. So I went, sounds like a plan, and left it there. But that's different. Her final word was very different to her previous cheerleading.
Yeah.
So, I think Danielle, if you're listening to this, we sort of agree with each other. Difference is that you come at it from a, let's say, a very positive perspective, and we come at it from, let's say, a very sceptical perspective. And the truth's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And it's probably represented by Danielle's final tweet, which is just fucking think about it and decide whether it's in your interests. And that's all we're urging them to do. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you get the impression that they're not, that it's just a stampede, that everyone's thinking they better do it or they're dead.
The other thing that I thought was interesting that happened on this topic, but it's more on the issue of dependency on tech generally, which I think as a broader issue is a bit worrying. It's got to a sort of worrying point. Was this big Rogers outage in Canada? I don't know if you covered that at all.
We did. I was thinking of that as a segment.
Because I've never ever seen anything on that scale. I've never seen a network go down and it's caused apparently as much disruption as it did to the Canadian economy. I mean, we have a colleague in Canada, Alan Bresnick. Alan, if you're listening, shout out to Alan. Probably isn't, but
why not Alan?
He's based in Toronto, and apparently he couldn't work that day.
Right.
It really prevented a lot of people.
And actually,
from
so this is
that's not a cloud, but it's critical infrastructure, and everybody's so reliant on broadband these days, and so reliant on telecom. And public cloud's the same. People are just overly reliant on these systems that, it doesn't take a lot to imagine something happening, and all of a sudden you can't use it, and then where are we? And I'm not sure we've ever had systemic risk of that nature before.
No, and it applies for the tech sector. I mean, again, I'm not going to talk about it this week, but this online safety bill looks like it's struggling a bit, which I celebrate. But
I think everybody would celebrate that, apart from a few sort of extreme lunatics.
Other censors.
I've not heard anybody say anything positive about it.
No. But, that's a systemic risk. And it's another example of, in this case, I think governments using the fact that a few tech companies have total control over the digital domain to impose censorship by proxy. And they're doing this a lot in the States as well. Your Canada thing is yielded an interesting thing, which we wrote about. Again, this could have been a segment. We might start a thing of doing like a Eurobytes mini discussions before we get to the main bits.
Yep.
But there was a follow-up from that where basically Canadian government or regulators are now saying to their operators that they've got to sign up deals for redundancy where they've got formal redundancy deals between themselves where one can step in if the other one fucks up.
And it's a bloody awful year for Rogers because they've got all these problems trying to merge with Shaw at the moment as it is, with people saying one of the problems with that merger is it creates too much concentration in the market. And now this has happened, so it's kind of not looking good for them really.
Sorry, I'm just organising the Yeti, provided by Danielle. Before you think I'm in any way ungrateful, Danielle, we continue to applaud you for your Yeti. I'm going to open up. Ian brought in some Daddy Stars this week, so there we go.
Do you want a Daddy Star? Pierre's not into the whole sort of. I told him that it's not like Northern European crap lager. It's proper
Pilsner.
Proper
I don't
Pilsner.
really like lagers anymore.
No.
Would you ever have expected to hear a Frenchman say something like that?
There's nothing I'd put past French people.
I'm more of a pale ale guy now.
Yeah, you are. Do you want a pale ale then?
Yeah, he does.
Do you want one?
He definitely wants a pale ale.
Yeah. Don't be soft. Have a beer.
Honestly, Brewdog is becoming my favourite brand now.
It is good.
Brewdog is good.
So much cheaper than.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think that's quite a lot of fucking about.
It's been half an hour already.
Was it? Probably.
Oh my god.
Well, we did a lot of talking before we started recording.
We have been talking about
Pierre hasn't got a hard stop.
Telecom.
Ian, I've got to say, everyone, Ian's wearing shorts there, and you can see a bit of leg if you're watching this.
They're quite short.
Does the camera
shorts.
go down to his legs?
They are quite short shorts. A bit like Pierre.
They are quite short shorts. I'm getting a bit turned on from here, if I'm honest. Right, enough of that.
They're not quite John McEnroe level, but
yes, 80s running shorts. Like Alan Partridge, where his assistant has to go, oh, you popped out. I'd actually, those pop culture references, I had one or two people comment, I can't remember if it was on social media or email or whatever, comment on us talking about Bullseye.
Oh yeah,
last
Jim
week.
Bowen.
Yeah.
It was someone at Babel, wasn't it?
Oh, was it Declan?
It was Declan
calling out,
Babel,
saying you don't have to be old to get that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. So what are we going to chat about this week? I think an obvious one this week is Ericsson. Not only did they have their quarterlies, I think the quarterlies themselves, I mean, you normally do a better job of it than I do anyway, starting by listening to the analyst call in the morning when I can't be fucked to get up for it. But the actual sort of minutiae of it didn't particularly excite me. What interested me was that their share price took another kicking when I just didn't think the numbers were that bad. So we can talk about that. And then the's a thing that just came up today. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, I did sanity check that with you before I led with my chin. And then today they've finally got clearance for this big acquisition of Vonage, and it's as an example, an opportunity for us to sort of reflect on that again. So I think we'll start with Ericsson. I think we're going to talk a little bit about sort of telecom sort of headcount and hiring and firing and digital transformation and that sort of thing. In this case, we've spoken about it a lot in the past as manifested by Vodafone, who was talking about hiring all these techies. Well, BT's just announced a bit of a hiring initiative, and there's a little twist to that.
They caught wind of what Vodafone's doing and thought, we'll have some of that.
We'll have some of that action. Neil McRae's gone, oh, shite, we better get some too. There you go, Neil. It's been a while. So we'll chat about BT and all that. And then I think we're going to finish. We tried to talk about this once before, this phone brand called Nothing. And ironically, when we tried to talk about it before, there was a technical problem and it got cut off. So people had literally nothing. So we're going to try and attempt to actually talk about that because we both wrote about it this week.
There's something spooky going on. That would be really weird.
It might be their founder, Carl Pei having a pop, because I'm always taking the piss out of him because he's got this sort of, he's trying for this sort of Jobsy, aren't I, edgy tech CEO thing.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear he's like that because I pretty much took it to pieces in the thing.
I wasn't especially accommodating either.
Yeah.
So that's that. And then just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site, you can also see it on YouTube and Facebook. That's not the way around I normally do it, is it? What do I normally do?
If you're listening to this,
it's too much Star at an early stage.
I've only just started my Daddy Star.
If you're watching, I don't know.
No, you can't remember either.
Deary, mate.
Anyway, as long as I get them all in, you can watch it on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook or somewhere, and you can listen to it on the site or on iTunes or SoundCloud or Spotify or loads of other podcasting platforms.
That'll do.
Do. We were actually talking in a internal meeting about whether or not we're ever going to do those ads, but ads where, like on most podcasts I listen to, where the actual podcaster does it live.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the best way rather than some stitched in audio file. But then there's always the danger of the podcaster being a bit too irreverent and pissing off the advertiser. So we'll have to see. I mean, it's not immediate. It's just a discussion we had internally, but it'd be interesting to see how I handle that.
Subscribe to the newsletter as well.
You what?
The newsletter.
Oh, yes, and subscribe to Telecoms.com newsletter for more of me and my chums, and subscribe to the Light Reading newsletter for more of Ian and his chums. All right, so Ericsson. I think as ever, I'm going to pass the ball to you because I've normally done most of the wittering by this stage. Ian, what's going on with Ericsson?
Well, they had their second quarter update this week, and yeah, I mean, I think we were both stunned by the sort of share price movement that day, because normally when it opened 11.5% down, and I think even by the end of the day it was sort of 9% down the previous day. Now, normally when you get something like that happening, it's to do with there's some shenanigans in Iraq that they've been found out for, and there's a possibility that the DOJ in the US is going to fine them heavily, or they've bid for this company Vonage and no one really buys into it, no one's really convinced. I think they went down 6% that day, or something of that nature, something really disastrous. So for an earnings announcement, for it to drop 11.5%, you'd think, this must be a shocking
Yeah,
set
something
of earnings.
catastrophic.
When companies share
Or a
price-
really massive earnings miss.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. When an earnings day happens and the share price opens 11.5% down, I remember when Nokia had those problems, for instance, a couple of years ago, and it was all to do with
Be a big miss.
our 5G product line is basically
Turns
shit,
out we suck.
and we've got massive problems, and we need to turn it all around, and we're going to have to spend a lot more on, getting things back on track. And so you sort of think, what the hell's going on here? And then you look at the document and you hear the CEO on the call. So sales are up 13%, I think.
Yeah, 5%
organically.
Yeah,
pretty
adjusted
good.
for adjustments.
5%.
Yeah.
Well, that's the constant currency. It's up 5%.
Yeah.
Net income was up about a fifth. The operating margin was up, and it's like, I don't really get this. And it seems to be that they got that. If you look at the gross margin, which I think is quite closely tracked because it's sort of an indication of sort of not raw material components costs and things like that.
Yeah, just general business health.
Yeah, general business. Yeah, to some extent, but it had gone down. It was 43% last year this time, and it's 42 point something percent now.
Yeah, it's about a percentage point or so.
Yeah, so the gross profit was less than they'd been expecting, and then there was a knock-on impact. But essentially, it was just. I just found it very, very weird that caused a market reaction that was that extreme.
That was like 10%.
For it to go down that much just because they had... And this is the weird thing that I don't really understand, okay? Everybody knows that we're facing component shortages. We're facing, massive supply chain issues. We've got inflation at sort of highs that we've not seen for a long, long time in our lifetime. I don't remember it ever being at 10%, really.
No.
That's the UK level. It's not...
Do you
not
know,
as bad
just
in
a
Europe,
complete tangent?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a personal finance thing, so be as vague as you want. But have you got some sense of your mortgage and whether it's fixed and when that fixed fixed period finishes?
Well, it's rent for me, mate. But
it's rent. Well, so I've got a mortgage that's fixed. I'm not going to give any more detail on that because obviously it's personal. But obviously interest rates are going to keep going up, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because they tend to do that to try and get inflation down.
Yeah. Well,
and I'm just thinking there's a race on between when my fixed rate mortgage expires.
Yeah. Well, my rent's gone up 150 quid a month.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Shit. What is that? A renegotiation, or have they just unilaterally chucked that at you?
No. Well, it was. This is what we're putting the rent up to. Your contract's up for renewal. And
Oh,
it was
right.
Like, well,
so it's an annual thing.
Yeah, but it was. I mean, we've been there a long time, and then it was a case of us going to them and saying, "Well, that seems quite steep, 150. As a percentage increase, it's quite a lot." And then it was like, "Sorry, that's what we did."
Yeah, so
which is pretty much the situation you're in as a tenant these days because they can do what they want. Really.
So the flip side for me as an owner is, I've got this fixed rate mortgage and I'm fine for now.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what interest rates do for now, but when this expires, then I'm shitting myself. So I'm thinking, it's not immediate. And I'm just thinking, is all this stuff going to blow over? Anyway, the reason I bring all this tangential stuff up...
How long is it fixed for?
I think I've got another couple of years.
You have a 5-year fix or something?
Something like that, yeah. And I think I started it 3 years ago. Something like that. So I wasn't going to go into more details. And then Pierre just goes and asks me.
Hopefully it's better in 2 years. Yeah.
Well, so that's the point I'm trying to make. So it's like a bit of a race against time. No doubt. Like as we go further into this year, interest rates are going to go up more.
Yeah.
And if my mortgage was about to expire and I have to renegotiate, I'd be shitting myself.
Yeah.
And so you're just hoping that everything's calmed down, but I'm not confident that in 2 years' time it will have calmed down.
Moody's is predicting that inflation will go down quite a lot next year. The rate of inflation.
Okay, good. I hope Moody's is right.
So their forecast is, this is actually in a telecom report, but they talked about general inflation, and in the UK it's forecast to hit about 10%. I think in December. It's a little bit less than that now, which is higher than the rest of Europe, by the way, because I think we have some other pressures as well. And then next year they're saying it goes right back down to sort of 3%.
Well, actually, while we're doing a tangent, there's something I meant to do in the pre-bullshit that I forgot to do. Talking about unique pressures to the UK, we got a Bojo's risigned. I don't know
yeah. We never talked about that.
And we got a Tory leadership race. I don't know if either of you two give a shit. But I was just wondering if you've got a favourite who you'd want to be the next PM.
I haven't, to be honest, I haven't paid enough attention to the whole thing that's going on.
What about you, Pierre?
He hasn't.
Do you care
about
speak for
him.
Tory leadership race? Okay, well then that's a dead end. For me, it's Kemi Baden.
I'll tell you who I think it's going to be. Rishi.
Probably will be.
Rishi Rich.
Yeah. Although the other weird one, the other front runner is this woman called Penny Mordaunt, who I don't know that much about, but she doesn't seem to have done that much.
Well, she's just a lunatic, though, isn't she?
Oh, is she?
I think she just sort of says things that she doesn't...
Just says random, flaky
comes out
shit.
of random bollocks, basically.
Yeah, she's got in trouble on Twitter. There was a hashtag any but penny.
Yeah.
Just because I think a few years ago, you know how in the culture wars everyone's obsessed with trans these days.
Yeah.
And I think a few years ago she was like, yeah, she was all for self-ID, and which is one of these sort of touch points. And then more recently, now that she's a candidate, she was asked about it, and she was going, no, I never said that, and she obviously did.
Yeah.
And so that led to sort of trans Twitter to freak out, which is I think where that hashtag came from.
Whoever it is, they're both massively unelectable, so they'll screw themselves by pointing either one of them.
What, Rishi or Penny?
They're both unelectable people.
You think?
Yeah.
Why?
I think because she's a lunatic and he's basically Mr. Rishi Rich, you know, whose wife's
just too
there's been far too much negative publicity about him over the last few months for him ever to recover from that. And he comes out with these bizarre comments that he seems to think people are going to like I'll govern like Thatcher. As if we're in a phase where people hark back to Thatcherism and go, that's great.
But what you might be slightly overlooking there is the mechanics of the Tory leadership.
Oh, sure, the Tories will love it.
Well, that's all that matters at this stage.
Totally,
because
there's not a vote, no one's voting for him.
Up until you get to the final two, it's just MPs.
Yeah.
And then the final two, it's the Tory membership, which is about a fucking 100,000 people.
Exactly. So it's the whole thing's undemocratic. He'll be
it is.
It's a bit like when Theresa May got in. She was unelected. I mean, we've seen how these people get on. Yeah, we had Gordon Brown, Theresa May, unelected.
The people who just come in halfway
through and take over never do very well. So
I'm telling you should check out Kemi Badenoch, who's
the little I know about her, she seems pretty good.
Yeah,
but this is turning into a massive tangent. But,
yes, well, I meant to have the tangent before we started talking about Ericsson.
I was just going to say on. But it's relevant to the inflation stuff and the costs is really relevant.
That's why we went
this
off
is
on
what
that
I didn't really get is that we all know, investors often bake things in, don't they? You know, sometimes you look at it and it's like, why is it not reacted when the performance is like this? And it's because, well, everybody knew. And this is what I don't get is like everybody knows that we're in a really shitty situation in terms of... Now, to me, I think you'd struggle to find, and I'm not trying to be nice to Ericsson, but if I look at, we track these companies. We look at Ericsson, Nokia, Cisco, Adtran, companies that sell gear and products related to gear. If you look at all of them, I think you find it really hard to find one of them that has got its supply chain in a better looking position at the moment than Ericsson. Nokia hasn't reported second quarter results yet, but when they did their first quarter results, they blamed a 4% drop in sales. This isn't even a margin thing, in sales at their mobile unit, which is roughly the equivalent of Ericsson's networks business, on supply chain constraints. Ericsson's saying we haven't seen any issue at all on sales. We can deliver what we want when we need to, in the quantities that we've been asked for. And I think a lot of this dates back to what Börje Ekholm, who's the CEO, did when he came in 2017.
Is that you pronounce his first name? Is it Börje?
Börje, I think. Well, we learned that, didn't we, when we were out with Erland in the pub, and he was saying who you're talking about with this Börje.
Right.
And it's because it's a soft E.
That's what the two dots.
The dots. Like that. Yeah, it's like
that's good. I just forgot.
But Ekholm, when he came in 2017, I think he came into a company that was bloated, had expanded into some areas that it shouldn't have done, perhaps.
Because Westberg got all carried away.
On what it does well, on the core sort of network stuff. And so his whole thing at first was actually a cost mission, wasn't it? It was all about really trying to...
It was about profitability.
It was about profitability. It was all about making...
And maybe that's one of the reasons they get a bit spanked when their profitability goes in the wrong direction.
Possibly, but the thing they've done is very much like Tim Cook at Apple, who's known as to be a bit of a supply chain freak, is I think what he did was look at... supply chains, and I spoke with, as you probably did as well, with Frederick Yedling, who's
I was late.
Yeah, I
fucked up the time zones.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. I was an hour late because I'd got the time zones wrong.
That's a big late thing. But
I mean, I was an hour late in my head, but then I had the PR people going, "All right, Scott, you planning on turning up anytime soon?"
Well, he's the head of the networks business. He's very senior, one of the top men in the organisation. And I asked him about this. Do you think some of this goes back to the Echo coming in and trying to look quite in a disciplined way at costs? And he said, yeah, but also, when all this stuff about to do with the Chinese started to happen, the Trumps that are clamping down on ZTE, ending up on the entity list, and then there was a pushback against Huawei. One thing that Ericsson did was to say, hang on a minute, things aren't looking that great geopolitically. We need to make sure we have the ability to serve China, but also the ability to serve other parts of the world and not be reliant on Chinese facilities.
Yes.
And you can see that
diversify risk across the board.
Diversify risk, and this isn't just bullshit, because what you could see some of the things that have been happening quite a long time ago now. Setting up this factory in the US that can produce equipment for that market. They've got one in Europe as well. Just having a sort of dual vendor strategy for their own components. Everybody talks about. It's interesting because on the operator side, there's always this sort of push to have diversity in the supply chain now and have options. And Ericsson's obviously been aware of this as well. It has its own supplies, it has its own constraints there and things that can go wrong. And it just seems to me like they've done quite a good job of doing that, because if they hadn't, how would their performance look as good as it has? Now, okay, the gross margin's gone down by 1 percentage point, but I mean, seriously, they're going to worry about that when sales are up 5% organically and the operating profit's up and net income's up. It just seems... You look at most other equipment vendors and they're not... Cisco is complaining, and by the way, its own performance when it last reported year on year is flat, not 5% growth, and it's slightly different player, slightly different market. And one of the things they were saying is we can't supply at the moment because of Chinese factory constraints and things like that. So
it's like that thing to do with cars I chatted about the other week, where you can't order a new Ford Focus. Apparently,
I just think they've done. I just think, if I'm going to be positive about them, I think they've done a really good job on that front,
steadying the ship,
and having redundancy. Now, who knows? Maybe in a few months' time it'll go horribly wrong and everybody will go, Ian, you were talking complete bullshit a few months ago. But it's up to now, and comparing them with their peers, they've done far better on a results basis. I mean, this is a really strong set of results. In a market like now, to report 5% organic growth and a fifth increase in net income. Remember, this is a company when Ecom came in 2016, it wasn't profitable, I don't think. They were reporting losses. That first year he took over when he's trying to steady the ship. They were reporting massive losses.
No, I agree. I think and so that's what we were baffled about, to take a 10% hit on your share price. And the other thing to put into context on that 10% share price hit, given that certainly I got the impression from reading other, like FT, Reuters, Bloomberg or whatever, the main thing that investors were shitting themselves about was this gross margin thing.
Yeah.
The gross margin was that low last quarter. So it's not like it's the first time gross margin
year on
dipped.
year it's gone down, but it was
year on year, but sequentially it's about flat. Yeah. The big dip was last quarter, and they got punished for it last quarter. So it seems irrational for there to be an additional punishment. I mean, their shares are down in the 12-month period. Their shares are down like 30-odd%.
I mean, I think one thing we have to say about their shares being down is that pretty much everybody's shares are down.
Yeah, but Nokia's aren't.
Over 12 months.
Yeah, no, they're because I've got a tenner's worth. I think they're about 10% up. They have really? No, they have gone down. They had a peak a few months ago, and they've been going down in recent months.
Yeah,
so is everyone.
Yeah, well, quite.
I mean, everybody's big tech suffering.
But no, Nokia's done better. Anyway, and then, and so that seemed weird because Ericsson's share price is at a historical low anyway.
Yeah.
For them to be punished again to the tune of 10% seemed irrational.
They're not lower than.
No, I mean historically, like in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
like
they're not lower than it was when Ecom came in.
No, you're right. Right.
I mean, the thing I'd say is the risk to them. I think the risk, and maybe this is what some analysts or investors are thinking, is their customers are not in the best position at the moment. Yeah, because people like us are starting to think, am I spending too much on my mobile phone? Am I spending too much on my broadband? Maybe I should be thinking about shopping around and going.
Back to personalising it. So we were talking about mortgages, but I mean, like, God, there's just weird little anecdotal things. Like, quite often, I tend to shop at Sainsbury's, and I went to Sainsbury's yesterday, and quite often, like, if I'm buying tomatoes, I'll buy the posh. You know, like, there's normally 3 tiers. There's like the posh tier, the regular tier, and the sort of your skint tier.
Yeah.
And I quite often for like fresh produce, I buy the posh tier because like tomatoes actually taste of something. Whereas you get just
it's very hard to find tomatoes that taste of anything in the UK.
Well, it is, but you got half. But you have if you pay, then you might get organic ones or something that actually
get the
fucking
sort of
taste of
cherry
something.
tomatoes because they seem to be
and they're
better
just
for
like little
flavour.
water balloons.
Yeah.
Anyway, but then last time I went, fuck it, I'm going to buy the water balloons because there was about a 300. I just looked at the price and it was like a quid for a pack of 6 of bog standard ones and 3 quid for a pack of 6 of posh ones, still on the vine with, with all the poncy stuff around them. And I thought, do you know what?
A bit of leafage can put the price up
or
by
whatever.
£2.
And I understand the marketing. I understand the middle class marketing. I've been joking
It's like
about
those
it for
eggs,
years.
isn't it? They've got a feather on them. The Burford Browns.
Still
There's
got
like
a bit
little
of the-
feather stuck on it.
No.
Which you think someone's just come out.
Genuine
They've got some
chicken's
bloke
arse.
in a factory and they're paying him. He's like 16 years old. And he puts a bit of super glue and sticks
Just
it
so
on
you
the
know it's come
eggshell,
from a chicken
just
and
to
not a
make sure it
machine.
looks like it's come from a chicken's
There's no.
arse.
There's
I
no
swear to God,
upside
you
to
buy
that.
Burford Browns,
I
which
do.
cost a
I only buy
fortune. There's
Burford
always
Browns.
a feather on one of the eggs.
God, you two both buy posh. Well, so this,
well,
this
I
is the
don't,
point.
but my wife gets them something because she likes nice
I
scrambled
don't. I've never
eggs
heard of
and-
Burford Brown's egg.
I really
eggs.
eat
they're
eggs.
good.
But any bit of any product, whether it's processed or fresh, has that sort of what I call middle class tier.
Yeah.
Where it's a bit posher, it's a bit special. It's it's been produced by chickens that are stroked and told how lovely they are every day, and all that sort of thing. But there's a massive premium on it, and I think back to the getting off the tangent, back to the point. This is how you get these inflationary spirals or deflationary spirals or whatever. These macroeconomic trends self-reinforcing, because now we're all shitting ourselves, and you might just buy bog standard eggs next time with no chicken arse on them.
Yeah, and to go back to telecom, I mean. One really interesting thing that happened is because we're in sort of a house that's been turned into flats, and someone new has moved in upstairs, and we keep getting this situation where when someone new moves in, well, we've been at the place for years, but we've had several new people living above us. We always get BT phoning up and saying, "Oh, we see you cancelling your deal with us because there's an address issue." Obviously, they set up a new. And then so they contacted my wife and said, we see you shutting your account. She's like, no. She said it's probably to do with the fact that people have moved in upstairs and there's always this mix-up that seems to happen. And the woman on the phone went, oh, sorry about that. By the way, you're on this deal, but you can basically have the same thing for 10 quid less. So just simply because of this mix-up, we're now paying £10 less per month
for BT.
For BT, for broadband.
Right,
and
that's handy, isn't it?
We're getting the same service.
Well, they need to call me soon.
Now, I suspect they're doing this sort of thing because it's a really competitive market, fibre, but they're conscious that people are probably shopping around as well. I mean, I'm thinking I'm spending far too much on my smartphone, for instance.
Yeah.
Actually, work pays for that, but even so, it would still be good to try and get something that maybe costs less because, it's just unnecessary.
See,
I think
work doesn't pay for my smartphone. I'm missing a fucking trick here.
Yeah, this dates back to the old days of light reading, though,
way
before
back.
we got taken
light
over.
reading.
It's a benefit they haven't
Okay.
taken
So
away from
it
yet.
rolled over from
Yeah,
light
it did,
reading
yeah.
days. Right.
But ordinary people are going to be thinking is the same thing, aren't they? People whose work doesn't pay for their smartphones, they're going to be thinking, I need to start thinking about how much I'm spending. Now, the knock-on effect is that operators then potentially are thinking, well, where do we cut costs? And this Moody's report that I referred to, which is about telecom and cost pressures, basically, in an inflationary environment. We've seen BT staff, threatening. Well, they've voted to go on strike this summer.
Hold that thought with BT staff.
Because their wage demands aren't being met.
Yep.
It's very, very hard to get rid of staff in Europe. You do see headcount going down, but to try and do it at a quicker pace is a hard thing to do. So maybe there's this concern that one thing that happens is they try and extend replacement cycles for equipment instead, and they go and talk to their vendors and they say, well,
Sweat
instead
your
of
assets and all that.
exactly, instead of moving this box out and putting a new one in from Ericsson that is so much better, we're just gonna carry on using it. And this is maybe the worry, and this is what Ecom had to deal with on the call from some analysts. And they have quite a compelling argument, I think. And also it's interesting because I think it's quite hard for operators to cut spending on equipment and capex simply because there's so much competition in the market that you're putting yourself in a risky position if you're not upgrading your network and your rivals.
Yeah, and there's also the risk of false economies. Like if you overdo the sweat in the assets, you end up costing yourself down the line.
But his whole thing, they have this expression they're calling product substitution, which is almost what they've been doing since 2017 anyway, when he came in. But they've massively increased their R&D budget.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's to do with actually the improvements in the gross margin that have happened. They attribute to that, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. But basically, what you're doing is you're making products that
was
are
one thing Frederick was stressing on the call with me.
Yeah, you're making products that are very, very competitive, and you've improved the economies of scale for them, and you drive cost out of it, and then you can sell them at a lower cost, and basically it sort of perpetuates. And what Ecom was saying is what we want to be able to do is basically go to operators and say we've got this. I mean, an interesting example of this is what happened last year, if you remember, when they came out with all that sort of 11 kilogram base station stuff, and you had women pictured walking along with one in either hand. If you can go to an operator and say, here's a radio unit that weighs half as much as it used to, and you install that, you only need to use one technician from now on to do it, whereas previously you'd have needed two. I mean, maybe that argument's a little bit spurious because you always have a couple of people on these teams anyway. But a more compelling one is the energy savings that you get with this new equipment, and you're putting it on. You're putting it onto infrastructure that needs reinforcing if things become too heavy, and the costs of reinforcing the steel or the concrete, are probably outweigh what the operator needs to spend on the box.
Yeah.
So basically, what Ecom was sort of saying is, they can spend more with us. We can have a renegotiation of prices when the contracts come up. Sell them something with more features that's going to bring benefits for them and lead to operating cost savings for them. But they pay a bit more for us to get it because they see the economics of that in the long run. Now, that sounds quite a compelling way of looking at it if they can do that.
Yeah, and that's also the argument behind some of their R&D spend is they say, we spend all this money on creating more clever shit that's more efficient.
Totally.
And costs us less to produce, which increases our margin.
Costs us less to produce.
So what they're trying with their investors, I think, is that, to me, it just comes down to a long-term versus short-term thing. They're trying a long-term argument with their investors. They're going, look, just fucking calm down. We're blowing all this krona on this R&D right now, but it'll pay off down the line. And the investors are going, nah, we want a return now. That's the impression I get. I mean, that's a massive sort of distillation.
Or maybe they just doubt some of these arguments and worry about things getting much, much worse later in the year or next year. Maybe that's...
Maybe they think they're lying. Maybe they don't believe them.
I mean...
See, they're Swedes. Swedes don't lie.
The weird thing is that you look at the... Because I said to Frederick Yedling on the call, I said, well, the people seem to be worried about inflationary pressure and there's a concern about operators cutting spending. And he was like, well, one point that Echo made on the call before I asked him that was that telecom has always held up quite well in sort of periods of economic strife, if you like. And it has, it's true. You look at the history, it has been a sector that performs well, generally speaking. And if you look at the analyst forecasts at the moment, what Del Oro's saying, which is a market research firm that they rely on quite heavily, obviously, but also what Omdia is saying, I think, they're all forecasting a growth in RAN spending this year. And I think next year it's not...
Del Oro had a thing this week about RAN forecast, and it was fairly healthy.
Yeah. So, and that's the market that Ericsson's in. So it's odd that investors are so sort of negative. The other thing that I took away from it, which wasn't mentioned in the report, you had to sort of be on the earnings call for this, was how well they're doing in terms of market share outside China. I didn't realise how dramatic it was, the improvement since he came in.
I was just going to talk about geographical.
They're cleaning up. They really are. When Boy Ekom came in 2017, if you exclude China, which I think we have to do now because it's almost a sort of Chinese-dominated market, isn't it? They basically, we've got a situation where Ericsson and Nokia are sort of increasingly less relevant there and fringe. But you ignore that, and they had a 33% market share when he came in of RAN. It's now 39%. It's gone up 6 percentage points. That's massive.
Where? Ex-China?
Ex-China.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah,
what, the rest of the world? Oh, this is just RAN. Because I was looking at a map. Sorry to butt in. I was looking at a slide that I took from their thing, which is, I think, total sales, not RAN. And I was going to make a point about diversification of risk, because 37% of all their sales come from North America, which obviously would be principally US.
Yeah, well, that's because the US operators spend more, and that doesn't say anything about market share.
No, but it says something about where they're exposed and where they're not.
It does, yeah.
More than a third of their shit is let's say a third of it's the US. Let's assume 4%.
Yeah,
of that
yeah, because the big US operators are obviously the guys that spend a lot of money. But
I mean, that's compared to, let's say, the whole of Europe and the whole of Latin America, which is 25%.
Yeah.
The whole of Africa and presumably Middle East, which is 8%. The whole of Northeast Asia, which is 12%.
Well, this is exactly why when Verizon lost that deal with, when Nokia lost that deal with Verizon, that went to Samsung for 5G rollout, it had such a big impact on them. And
just America and China are just by far the biggest markets.
They are. But the point is, anyway, that in terms of their market presence, they're 6 percentage points higher. They've gone up more than 1 percentage point every year. That's massive. And I said to Frederick Yelding, well, does that make you the biggest vendor then in RAN outside? Because it used to be Huawei. Surely. I think it was always a reputation. It was Huawei was the biggest CSP vendor globally. Now maybe that was factoring in China as well. I don't know. But he's like, absolutely. We're much, much bigger than the next competitor down. And
God, you ask him much better questions than I do. Mine are very generic and top line.
Yeah,
not helped by the fact I'm late and I've only got 5 minutes left.
But it sounds like I'm sort of trying to persuade people to buy Ericsson shares or something on this call because I'm being overly positive about them. But I just thought it was, they've obviously got concerns. They've got this Iraq issue, which is not a good situation to be in.
Not a good look.
It's not a good look to have potentially funded ISIS. And
no one's putting that at the top of their marketing strategy.
And there's still a possibility of a US fine. I think the recent reports have been saying that fine could be about $300 million, which isn't that bad.
Well, but let's move on, just because in the interest of time, but also the other interesting thing to talk about Ericsson, which just came along today. Which is linked to this sort of Iraq thing a little bit, because their biggest ever acquisition was a bid last November to buy this company called Vonage, which superficially does sort of unified communications as a service and that sort of thing, but it's more about APIs and a lot of the stuff that, again, I think Erland was talking about, and I was recently talking about, I won't name them because this is a commercial thing, but if you look on the Telecoms.com website, a recent webinar that we did was to do with what the client called exposure, which is basically opening up the network to other people, which you do via APIs, which is what Ericsson is apparently buying with Vonage. Anyway, and we're still, I think I can speak for you, we're both still a bit on the fence as to whether this is a great idea or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, they think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
But it had been put on the back burner with regulatory approval. It seems largely because of all this Iraq fuckery.
Yeah.
But now today, like just the story I wrote before I came into the office to do this podcast, they got approval from the Yanks to do it, which is the last hurdle. So now they can go ahead and buy them. And the interesting thing about that, I thought the time was interesting, which is the day after their quarterlies.
Yeah,
that's probably not a coincidence. But also, what do you read into that, if anything, about what the Americans are going to do to them about the Iraq stuff? If they've let this go through, because this could have been one arm of one sort of punitive measure, is to block this.
It could have been.
They've let this go.
And I think it addresses that risk, which is perhaps the main risk, actually, because there's a breakup fee, I think, when these things happen, isn't there, generally speaking? And it's not.
Yeah, just what's happening with Elon Musk right now on Twitter.
Well, yeah, that would have been another thing to maybe talk about. We talked about that before, so
we will. But we will again one day, I'm sure.
But the I don't know what that would have entailed if they had to sort of call it off in terms of the financial repercussions. But I'm right in saying it's the biggest deal in Ericsson's history.
Yes,
it's about $6 billion.
That's
or something.
certainly how I reported at the time. $6.2 billion. Yeah.
So it does address that risk. It's interesting that when they got the sort of go ahead today, I said to our freelancer who covered it, Ken, to have a look at what the share price was doing, and it was basically
fuck all.
Bah.
Yeah, no one gave a toss.
Because I don't think people buy the deal, really. That's the problem. I don't think people are... So if I'm going to start being negative about Ericsson now, this is one thing I think they're going wrong on, is this potentially the Vonage deal. I don't think that the case for it, to me, is not well made. I don't think it's...
Not to the tune of $6 billion.
It's not very clear. Takeovers where you really have to sort of scratch your head and struggle to get your head around it. And it's like, well, yeah, if they do that and then this happens, then maybe we'll make lots of money. And yet you have to sort of make a series of sort of jumps about... We can get these developers who used to write sort of stuff. They used to do APIs for the things that Vonage did, and we can get those to now
pivot
to 5G enterprise stuff. And then if that happens, then we can make some money. Because
so the thinking is that these developers write bits of software that enable, let's say, an agricultural or a transport logistics or a heavy industry company to sort of tap into networks and do clever shit.
Exactly.
But that's a big jump, isn't it? It's a big leap of faith.
Totally big
that's
jump.
Going to happen.
It's a really big jump, and you really have to sort of scratch your head and think about where all the money kind of accrues from this, and why it's a good thing for Ericsson, and and how does it help necessarily them to sell more equipment? I mean, they make most of their money from selling RAN gear. Yeah, they sell base stations, and we've already been saying they're massive in that market.
Well, presumably
anyway.
they think they can sell that gear to these other verticals, as we call them. These other industries, as we used to call them back in the day, before it was all verticals and horizontal.
Yeah, I guess they do, but isn't it a separate thing? Isn't it a separate thing from your core?
Yeah, but I think they're trying to diversify. They're trying to expand their total available market. They're not just sell to CSPs, but sell to factories and sell to...
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that even if they're selling to factories, isn't this API stuff that you're doing is quite different from selling a base station to a factory, for instance.
I see.
I mean, Nokia, when it talks about the enterprise opportunity, one thing that I find quite interesting about them as opposed to Ericsson is they quite clearly say if you sold a base station for every factory in the world, it's another 14 million base stations.
Yes.
And there's only this many in the world at the moment anyway. So if that happened, it would be a much bigger...
But I think they're trying to do more than just flog base stations, aren't they? They're trying to get into services.
Yes, but that's what I don't understand, because I can quite clearly see if you sell 14 million base stations, it's a huge amount of money for companies that make most of their money out of doing that. But the actual API stuff, I don't see why that translates into a big opportunity. You see what I'm saying? Most of them.
I was being devil's advocate to some degree. I mean, I largely agree with you. It's hard to get your head around the business.
The core network opportunity, which this seems to tie to more, let's say, than the RAN one. The RAN market's worth about $40 billion a year. I think the core network market's about $8 billion. Mm-hmm. So think about it in those terms. And this, to me, seems to be more of a sort of core network thing. And add on to that, let's say. To pay $6 billion for something, I just don't see it. It just doesn't. I mean, it's not just me. Investors themselves clearly are looking at this and going, they've never really kind of got it. And
the other thing, so just as you can have the other Daddy Star if you want. Just as you sort of asked Ken to have a look at the share price, it's the cylindrical thing. I just gave Ian my key ring, which has got all kinds of bullshit on it, and he's trying to work out which one's the bottle opener. Just as you instructed Ken to have a look, and I'm sure you looked anyway because Ken knows what he's doing. I had a little look at the share price, and there was just nothing, not even a blip.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the only thing is, when I'm trying to read the tea leaves about share prices and that sort of thing, what's in there? Is it just totally priced in? Did the market completely price in? Did they never think there was any chance that this
possibly,
US
because I think the
agency...
chance was very, very slim that it would do something like that. I think there's a bigger risk of a fine. That was always the real risk, I think, rather than going quite as far as saying you're not taking over Vonage or Vonage. I never know how it's supposed to be pronounced.
Say Vonage, that's more English. Fucking Vonage.
Yeah, Vanage.
It's more sophisticated.
Yeah,
but then the reports recently of what the DOJ fine could be if one comes through don't sound that bad to me.
What were you hearing?
About 300 million.
Isn't that less than they got?
Well, they got $1 billion before.
Yeah.
And they coped with that, because the other thing that we should say about Ericsson, if we're sort of trying to be nice to them, is that their net.
We're not trying to be nice or not nice.
Just trying to be objective.
Just to stress.
To be objective is that their net cash position is bloody good.
They got plenty of.
They got loads of money,
bank.
and they've built it up again, even since even in the last few months it seems.
Yeah, so they're quite healthy. I mean, look, if I wasn't conflicted and I was an investor, I would have thought this wouldn't be a bad time to buy some fucking Ericsson shares, if I'm honest.
Well, yeah, because it's gone down so much, it seems.
Exactly, and it went down again, and we think it's irrational. And who are we to know? We're not equity analysts. We've probably missed a bunch of shit that equity analysts have spotted, but maybe not. Maybe the market is being irrational, and maybe this is a good time to buy them. Who knows? Anyway, I mean,
I suppose the other thing we could say is, if you're looking at other. Let's assume that Omdia and Del Oro and all these other guys that do RAN forecasting, forget about the Vonage stuff. Mm-hmm. That's the main market. That's where they make their money, yeah?
Yeah.
That digital services thing, which is the core, and managed services is almost an irrelevance, actually. In fact, it makes a loss, doesn't it, anyway? So,
well, everything outside of Frederick's bit is a decreasing part of the business, isn't it?
So most of their money is in making RAN equipment, and the big analyst firms are saying that market's going to grow, and they're the main provider outside China. So their biggest risk is that operators are going to go, hang on a minute, which they are saying anyway, we're a bit overly dependent on Ericsson, aren't we? We need to get other suppliers into
in the US they might be thinking that. That's sure.
And what's the best way of doing that? Open RAN. Let's let's give some work to some of these smaller Open RAN players. But to me, Open RAN is. I know there's this parallel wireless fallout. Everybody's sort of looking at that, and can we read something into that about Open RAN? I mean, I don't really think it's an Open RAN story. I think it's more of the difficulties of smaller companies coming along and trying to.
Yeah, and there could be some unique mismanagement or fuck up that's happened to them, or misfortune.
Totally, but I think the trouble is in the climate that we're in at the moment, especially when it's really hard to get supply chains sorted out, and economies of scale are more important than ever. And also when you're doing deals,
Parallel might have been stung by the supply chain situation.
Well, I don't think it would have helped. I don't think that's the main reason. Okay. But it wouldn't have helped. It's not just Parallel. I think any small company at the moment. You look at some of the smaller equipment vendors, and you look at what they're reporting in terms of gross margins and cost of sales, and how much that's gone up, and it's much worse than Ericsson. And I think it's much harder for a smaller company to have redundancy. To have.
No, you're right.
And therefore, in this kind of environment, it's not to do with Open RAN, but because Open RAN by its nature is about getting smaller companies into the market and new competitors.
And yet the macro environment is hostile.
It's hostile to that. So the conditions almost suit an Ericsson really to actually do really, really well if the RAN market is growing.
I'd like to personalise it once more. We're employed by Informa, which is a FTSE 100 company. And certainly over the last few years, when the shit's been hitting the fan, and there have been times where it's been challenging for Informa, because let's not forget Informa. A lot of Informa's business comes from physical events. So obviously in 2000, that was a fairly alarming time for them.
Yeah.
2020, you mean?
Sorry, 2020. I keep doing that. I think I did that
in 2000.
Yeah, no, I did that on some other thing. I keep fucking that one up.
Sometimes it seems like 2000 to me as well, Scott.
In 2020, 2 years ago, that was alarming because obviously there were no physical events happening. But for me personally, working for a large company, and and there are pros and cons, and obviously everyone would like to be starting their own business and be completely autonomous and doing their own thing. But as a sort of middle-aged man with dependents and a mortgage and all that kind of bullshit, there are times where just being part of a large sort of monolithic thing that you think can just withstand these eddies and fluctuations that go on in the world economy and wars and pandemics and all this kind of stuff. You think, fucking hell, I want to be on a super tanker when the seas are choppy, not on a little fucking fishing boat.
Yeah, good analogy.
There we go. Yeah, no, I just did that on the fly.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, let's move it on. But talking about big companies, we're going to talk about BT. This is in the sort of context we've spoken about this a fair bit recently. I think last week we spoke about it because we had our nice dinner with Vodafone, and the people. What's he called? That tall bloke,
Johan Weinberg.
Johan Weinberg.
Formerly Ericsson himself, I think.
I think he was formerly Ericsson. He'd fit in well there. There's a lot of tall people at Ericsson. Tell you what, you go to Stockholm.
With Swedish accents.
Go to Stockholm, I feel like a fucking dwarf. And I'm 6'3", in case anyone's wondering. And Johan and people like Tiago Tenorio, is he one of the guys there? And whoever else was there? I can't remember.
Ahmed Al Sayed.
Oh, right, he's the UK guy, yeah?
Yeah, he's head. Well, but he's head of kind of software engineering for Europe as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they're talking a big game about, bringing on geeks. That's not the phrase they use.
No,
but
because they are them.
Yeah, they're not.
I think they probably happily refer to themselves as geeks.
Well, they're not the
most.
They're not the most extrovert people.
Yeah.
But bringing on geeks, by this I mean not personality type, but I mean techies, like technical people. And part of this is all the digital transformation. We're not an opco, we're something else. Anyway,
a techco or something.
Techco, yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I understand where that's coming from. And so BT's had their little go at it this week. They're talking about their digital transformation and getting more techies in. But, back over to you, Ian, they announced, so just like Vodafone have been saying we're going to get 700 geeks on board.
7,000.
7,000, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not really very well with numbers today, am I? And we're going to get them by the year 2000. No, that was a joke.
2024.
I know.
Something like that.
So now BT, as we say, I'll do my little Neil McRae impression. BT is going, oh, we'll see about that, pal. Well, I'll go, that shit.
It's not his bit that's doing it, though.
No, I know, but he's the only person I know in BT.
I know, he's software
enough to do an impression of.
It's not his bit.
So why don't you take it from there? What was their news this week?
Yeah, they have a bit called BT Digital that is the part of BT that's supposedly responsible for an expression I really hate. In fact, I think calling it BT Digital, I'm really with sort of Dean Bubley on this. I hate that word.
We've had this before where you've pushed back on digital.
But it's the bit that's supposedly responsible for digital transformation. But basically what it means
What does that mean?
That's the bit where all the software engineers are, essentially. I mean, you look at the kind of people they're trying to get hold of, and they've had quite a long list. And it's all the usual buzz phrases: artificial intelligence, machine learning, the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. Automation. Yeah. So basically that unit, which at the moment I think has about 3,500 people in it, I think I'm right in saying.
Don't ask me, mate.
Don't
ask me, mate. I just work here.
Is mainly software people. And the woman who runs that's called Harmeen Mehta. I think she might have worked for, I might have this wrong, but she might have worked for Airtel in the past, one of the big Indian operators.
So is she Indian? Because that might be topical to
Indian.
This story.
Yeah, she is Indian, yes.
Yeah.
And she's quite new at the company. She's only sort of been there a couple of years maybe. Got a good reputation, by the way, from analysts that I've spoken to. People think really highly of her, but she's essentially doing a similar thing to someone like Ahmed Al Sayed. I guess she's almost like his kind of counterpart. So she's
at BT, right?
Yeah, at BT. So she's trying to change the what BT is really, I guess, in a way. So again, part of this is about, and they mentioned this in their announcement this week about this recruitment drive they're having. Part of it's about relying less on external suppliers. Cutting out subcontractors. You can sort of save costs that way by bringing some of these people in house, and you have more sort of autonomy, I guess.
Yeah.
And independence. But part of it's also
always, just sorry to butt in. There's always that toing and froing, isn't there?
Yeah.
Between bringing things in-house, and then you bring things in-house, and then you'll get a bit of spin that goes, no, we're going to outsource because then we're cutting overheads.
Yeah, a few years' time they'll change their minds.
Exactly.
They'll outsource it all again. Yeah, that's the way it goes. But at the moment, it's all about bringing it in-house and not having external suppliers.
That's this year's thing.
And then there's obviously a related thing to that, which I think is about maybe potentially a bit more exciting, spinning up new services perhaps and doing things that might be revenue generating and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So as you said, Vodafone's got this, let's hire 7,000 people. It's not strictly hiring in Vodafone's case because a lot of it's retraining. Yeah. And that seems to be a big difference with what BT announced because it's all cast as hiring in their case.
Okay.
They want to hire 2,800 people by 2024 for this BT digital unit. So basically they want to get a load of software people into the company, new software talent to help with BT's digital transformation. And what I found curious about it is 1,000, they're very specific about where they're going to hire these people, which, by the way, Vodafone hasn't been. It's Vodafone's a global company, let's be honest, in a way that BT isn't.
Yeah.
Vodafone makes money across the world. BT makes 80% of its revenues in the UK. Even that's grown, by the way, because they've had to wind down their global unit a lot and sell things because it went tits up.
Yeah.
So they're very much a UK company, but they're very specific about where they're going to recruit, and it's mainly going to be in India. So 1,800 of these new jobs are in India.
60%,
Bangalore
70%.
Yeah. So Bangalore and another city I'd not heard of, but presumably, Bangalore's got a reputation for. India's basically known for lots of very bright sparks in software and low labour costs.
Yeah,
compared with a market like the UK.
But also in terms of, like, if we compare India and China, which are two by far the most populous countries in the world, and those are two countries that macroeconomically we've used to sort of import wage deflation by outsourcing stuff. China, we tend to outsource manufacturing.
Yeah.
India, we tend to outsource services like call centres and shit like that, over and above all the other things that India does. And as you say, there's tons of really smart people. God, I mean, so many tech companies are run by Indians, like Google's run by an Indian guy.
It is.
So, so they've also got a lot of clever, very highly educated people, but on a sort of broad macro level, a lot of the outsourcing that happens to India is sort of call centres and that sort of thing. And so they've obviously got, perhaps maybe in the main urban centres, they've obviously got a good infrastructure for people to work there remotely for Western companies.
Yeah.
That seems to be what BT's taking advantage of. Is that...
Yeah, and this is obviously not people in call centres. This is software engineers.
But it's the coding equivalent of a call centre in so much as they're remote.
Yeah, I played on this in my headline just to be provocative almost, really, but I was a little bit surprised that none of the national press picked up on something like this and went, they've got all these staff problems at the moment, BT, by the way, because they
mention that, the strikes and all that.
I mentioned it in my story, but basically staff are asking for inflation-matched pay rises, I think, and BT's offered between 3% and 8%, which is less than that, averaging out. The top end of it sounds good, obviously, but better.
Even that's
not quite what it is, and therefore we've got this possibility. Well, it doesn't seem like a possibility anymore. They voted to go on strike over the summer, so there's this risk now of things like if your broadband connection goes down, there's not really anybody there to fix.
Trains are going on strike again. In fact, there's a directly relevant thing. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got an event coming up towards the end of this month, which is BT.
Yeah.
And the fucking trains are on strike the same day, so they're in a nightmare with that one.
And so you look at a news story like this where they're then going on often recruiting in India, and it's almost like sort of BT's management flipping the bird at UK workers and going, well, if you're going to be like that. I mean, obviously these guys aren't going to be
delicate politically.
They're not fixing street cabinets in Blackpool, the guys that they're recruiting in Bangalore to do software engineering. But it's still, it's a bit odd in a way to me. We had that whole outsourcing thing, as you mentioned, with call centres, and it became quite controversial, I think, at one stage. It was almost like...
There's a time when the tabloids got hold of it.
Yeah, we need to bring this stuff back to the UK, and a company that makes most of its money from UK consumers and UK businesses having 60% of its recruitment drive for software talent in it. Now, I asked them a question about why most of the recruitments in India are not in the UK. Is it because the Brits are rubbish and too expensive? And they dodged the answer. They basically just said, no, both markets are important to us and we want to spread risk. And
there probably is a bit of both, because there is definitely wage deflation. I mean, the cost of living in most of India will be a fraction of what the cost of living is even in the most northern parts of England.
Yeah.
And that's just a factor. You could have people in Newcastle or Liverpool or wherever who are perfectly capable, but you've got to pay them more than someone who's perfectly capable in, wherever.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing
India.
I find interesting about it is, and it was another question I asked that didn't get answered properly. I can't remember what they said, but they just basically didn't answer it. What happens to overall headcount? I think we asked this at Vodafone's last
Is there a trade-off?
Yeah, so they're hiring all these people, and it's like, well, is your overall headcount going up or is it going down? Sacking other jobs, because obviously if you hire all those people, then it stays at the same level everywhere else. You've got quite a lot more staff in the business, and I mean, Vodafone, as I say, it's partly internal retraining, so it might not have much impact anyway. But if BT is going off and hiring another nearly 3,000 people, and let's be honest, software engineers are not cheap. Yeah. I mean, they're less cheap now because BT's after them as well as Vodafone, and you can guarantee that another operator will announce something like this in a couple of weeks' time, and then a bank will announce the same thing. Everybody wants software talent, so those wages are going up a lot.
No, I might try and tell my son to get into that.
Probably, well,
he's shown no inclination.
No, mine haven't either. They're not into that stuff, but I wish they were. But yeah, it's so. They didn't answer the question. I asked them, is overall headcount going up or down? And they just went, this is about BT Digital. It's not about the rest of the business.
Proper dodge.
But that organisation as a whole, if you remember, cast your mind back to when the guy who was running it looked like he should be running along the beach with a sort of, life jacket in his hand and, with his...
Gavin Patterson, right. It's funny where you're going for a second.
He had this target in 2018, I think, of cutting 13,000 jobs, which were mainly in back office and mid-level management roles. And yet the net reduction in BT's headcount between 2018 and now is only about 8,000. But they didn't say, oh, we're going to cut 13,000 jobs, but we're going to make up for a lot of that by hiring elsewhere. So they're still a massively bloated organisation.
You've been especially sharp and persistent and thorough about sort of telecoms industry, especially operator side headcount.
They have almost 100,000 people at BT, which is, and if you look at what that means in terms of, so a good way of measuring this is revenues per employee. If you look at that metric against other companies in the same sector and see what they earn, BT is, out of all the top European incumbents on revenues per employee, which is a sort of efficiency proxy, they're bottom of the list.
I see.
They're lower than Telecom Italia.
Wow. And without wanting to generalise about Italy,
and they're 50% of what Vodafone makes on that metric.
So they're half as efficient on that metric.
On that metric as Vodafone. Now,
but they are fixed line as well, and wholesale.
Of course, they're one market. They're fixed line. They're more heavily regulated, arguably, because of the fixed line presence. There's all sorts of other things. You have to. There's a few caveats, obviously, but they still seem to be a very bloated.
Yeah.
You still get the impression there's a lot of people at BT wandering around with clipboards, micromanaging other people and holding unnecessary meetings and doing those kinds of jobs.
Turning up at sites in hard hats and doing fuck all.
Yeah, exactly. And then they've got this initiative now where they're going to hire another 2,800 people who are really expensive people to hire. If they don't get rid of jobs elsewhere, their headcount's going to go up to about 101, 102,000. And it's just like, well, there's a lot that needs to be asked, because if those people as well are going to come in and, I mean, this thing about we can get new services out into the market and we can generate additional revenues, I think that's very, very it's going to be very, very hard for telecom operators to do that. I think there's a more attractive argument in terms of reducing reliance on suppliers, which is why they're saying they're not altering their sort of financial targets. And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, I think.
And back to the sort of angle of hiring people from India versus people from England. I'll stress, and I'm pretty sure I could speak for you on this. This is certainly not a xenophobic thing.
Oh no, not
it's certainly not a protectionist thing.
No,
but I think it's not even so much about BT. It's just sort of, what does it say in general if someone like BT wants to do this? I mean, I suppose it just sort of worries me again as a parent of an 18-year-old kid who's about to become an adult. Have we got so little fucking talent here?
Well, I mean, one thing we should say is that the other 1,000 of those roles are in the UK. Yeah. It's not like they're saying 1,800 are in India and the rest, by the way, are in the US. But it just seems odd to me that...
I don't think anyone outsources to the US.
No, they wouldn't. But if they did, this is the weird thing, though. Maybe this would have been a different... If they had said that, let's say for some reason, wage costs in the US were lower at the moment, and you could get software talent easily, which we know you can because it's good for that. And they'd gone, we're going to hire 2,800 people, but 70% of them are going to be based in the US. I sense the press reaction might have been a bit different than saying we're going to do it.
In what direction?
I just think it would have been a bigger story. It'd be like, well, why are you creating jobs in the US and not in the UK? Because I don't remember reading a single story on that announcement that said for a company that earns 80% of its revenues in the UK,
Right.
has no presence at all in.
So are you inferring that you think the media might have shied away from it because they didn't want to look racist?
I think it's possibly something to do with xenophobia.
Right.
Yeah, I just think it's odd that a company that doesn't really have a presence in India, a sales presence, they don't make revenues in India, not significant ones.
No,
anyway.
I mean it's clearly just a wage deflation thing.
It is what this is the equivalent of making low-cost cars in Slovakia for sale in France. That's what this is. It's
globalization.
It's a software equivalent of that.
And so, like, a spontaneous underlying theme of this pod has been inflation.
Yeah.
Which obviously is hard to run away from in the world right now. But, we talk about, like, balkanization and the sort of world splitting up because the West has chosen to ostracize China and that sort of thing. I think, to take it to a really macro level, I think we have an artificially high standard of living in the West because we have imported so much wage deflation from places like India and China and Vietnam and Africa and wherever globalization has enabled us to chuck labour over to, which in turn leads to this sort of more...
and then it doesn't last anyway because wages rise in those markets, and then all of a sudden...
eventually, I mean, China's definitely got...
Everyone wants to go to Vietnam. So.
Yeah, China's definitely got a demographic problem there with the growing middle class. And that leads to successful political campaigns such as Donald Trump's, which is Make America Great Again, which is a very much a nationalistic repatriation of labour. But that again is incoherent because why, as a business, would you repatriate? What would you pay an American twice the amount to do the same job as you would an Indian or a Chinese or a Vietnamese person? Yeah. So it doesn't make sense from a business point of view.
And even when it does get repatriated, as in Ericsson's factory in the US, by the way, which I think I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
It employs, because it's so heavily automated now, it's like that Tesla factory. It's all robots there. There's 100 people there actually doing anything.
It's all fucking HAL.
Yeah.
Giving people passive-aggressive vibes.
Yeah.
It's just... I find the macro picture fascinating precisely because it's just so impossible to get your head around. There's so many sort of interlocking
geopolitics
parts.
are interesting as well, because I think you'd mentioned before as well, India's been quite close to Russia on this whole sort of schism that we're seeing at the moment. In fact, I think they're importing a lot.
Yeah, they definitely haven't been waving Ukrainian flags around.
No,
have they?
they're being perceived to be too close to Russia and all this, and there's been concerns about that. And I find that quite interesting in terms of this. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch. I know I'm being deliberately provocative here, but you got to be careful these days about where you get your software written.
Right?
And you got to sort of worry a little bit about doing it in countries that perhaps aren't friendly to your own national interests.
No, I take your point there, but I'd also like to counter your point, acknowledging that you're being provocative to a certain degree. The culture that has been stoked for a while primarily by the US, which is anyone who's a geopolitical opponent of ours, you can't trust anything that comes out of there. Then how the fuck are you going to interact with any of these countries at all?
Well, I mean, but that's more of a push to have things done at home, isn't it? Which I think is happening. Yeah. It's all about protectionism.
And so back to inflation, what that ultimately means is everything gets more expensive.
Yeah, it does.
Because we've had this artificial deflation exported from other countries. And now if we're going to get everything done here, which in some ways you can applaud, certainly in a sort of nationalistic way, if more people around the UK, if my son ends up getting a better job, his first job is better paid as a consequence, and I'm obviously going to celebrate that. But if every time I get to Sainsbury's or buy a new car or whatever,
anyway, so
do you know what I mean?
Off.
Yeah. Anyway, it's all fucking so interlocked and confusing. Let's just stop it there because it's just too big.
Yeah. It's just drink more expensive beer.
Drink more expensive beer, and you can still get 5 Daddy Stars, 3 Daddy Stars for a £5.
I take pleasure from that. At least I can go and buy. The day that Tesco stops offering 3 Daddy Balls of Star for £5 is a sad day.
Sainsbury's does 3 Daddy Stars for a £5 as well.
You have to have the loyalty card with Tesco.
Although I do know, if you look at it, I think if you read it, it does say brewed in the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, but it still tastes like.
No, it still tastes proper. But
Prague.
That's still brewed in the UK. Molson Coors Brewing Company. It just, I mean, it's still Star.
Molson Coors?
Yeah, it's owned by Molson Coors.
Where are they from?
Molson's Canadian, Coors is American, but there's some North American conglomerate of beer. At least it's not owned by Budweiser. That makes me feel a little bit better.
Coors Light.
But it doesn't matter because, perhaps this is a sort of allegory for globalization. It doesn't matter because it still tastes like proper Czech beer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's just owned by Canadians and Yanks, and it's brewed in the UK.
With the recipe.
That is a perfect metaphor for globalization right there. It's owned by Canadians and Yanks, it's brewed in the UK, and it tastes Czech. Yeah. And it's only £5 for 3 big bottles. Okay. Let's move on to something lighter, and we tried to talk about this before. A few.
I'm waiting for the.
Let me unplug the mixer.
I'm waiting for the mixer to end. Yeah.
A few months ago, which is a sort of upstart smartphone brand called Nothing, which is started by this guy called Carl Pei, I think, who also created the smartphone brand called OnePlus. We've got at least one OnePlus in the Pacino household, and it seems to work perfectly well. And he came up with this brand called Nothing. It was like, okay, what the fuck's that all about?
It's a bit like Everything Everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing nowhere. And what he seems quite sharp on initially is definitely the marketing. Lots of very viral online. Oh, here's a little glimpse. Let's get everyone get the buzz up. Yeah, sort of thing, and that's fine. And I sort of went along with it because, to be honest, as a former smartphone analyst, which I was before this job, like 10 years ago.
You love all that.
I love it, but it was clear to me even then that the whole smartphone form factor and paradigm had sort of matured.
It'll still be a black rectangle.
Yeah, a black touchscreen rectangle, and whether you're into iPhones or Android, and that's the other thing. It quite quickly you only had choice of 2 operating systems as well. And I would argue, actually, that you can switch between iOS and Android, and there's not a fuck of a lot of difference on that one. So even the software and the user interface matured very quickly. So you're thinking, all right, Carl Pei, and he's got all these publicity shots of him looking smug, sort of lounging in a chair, being a big man. And I'm like, all right, Carl Pei, you're giving it large here. What are you going to do? And so we had all these teasers, and and we attempted to talk about it a few months ago, and the video fucked up, so that never came up. It was
a mysterious hand of Carl
Something
Pei,
went wrong. Yeah, Carl Pei. Yeah, he used the Force. He did some Obi-Wan Kenobi bullshit on the podcast, and then this week he finally launched the thing after all this teasing and all that, and I had a little look at it and I thought, oh shit, is that it? It felt like a real anticlimax. Now there's. And I'll hand over to you to maybe talk about my new show a little bit more, or not. But the top line thing about anticlimax is, of course, this is the double-edged blade of hyping. The more you hype something, the more you got to deliver.
Yeah.
When it finally turns up, and it just didn't have that much. And I just thought, after all that. And I was more disappointed. I wanted it to be bigger than it was.
Yeah.
Because I want there to be some excitement in the industry. I don't want it to just be yet another iPhone, yet another
I'm just amazed
Galaxy.
that he's got as much publicity for this as he has. And maybe some of it's to do with the fact that it's a UK registered company, and therefore, and we're in the UK and we're seeing a lot.
I think he's good at hype.
But then you saw some of the operators, Deutsche Telekom made a big announcement about it. We're going to start marketing the Nothing Phone 1.
Yeah, so did O2.
And it's like, okay, so what does this phone do? And to me, smartphone innovation is an area where you talk to all the people who've tracked this, people like Ben Wood at CCS Insight, and it's like nothing really's happened for a couple of years. You look at the recent iPhone models.
Yeah, but Ben Wood, with all due respect to Ben Wood, who he was smartphone analyst when I was one, and probably was long before, and he's as much of a sort of fixture in the smartphone analyst world as there is. But the problem with analysts is that they're normally too upbeat. So he'll be like tweeting these things, going, "Yeah, it's really great. Look at this. It's got some flashing lights on the back."
But I don't think he is upbeat about.
Oh, is he even sceptical? Okay, I'll take it back.
Well, I didn't talk to him directly, but from the BBC obviously spoke to him. And he didn't sound upbeat at all.
Okay. And, sorry, I must have missed that.
And I think the general sense in the smartphone industry is that innovation is in a bit of a slump because it's almost gone as far as it can. Hence, companies that do innovation really well in this area, like Apple, for instance, bringing out new models where the only real difference over the last one is the camera's a bit better or something.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you thought, well, if someone's making this much of a fuss and getting all this publicity, there must be something really special about this.
Yeah.
And from what I can gather, the big innovation seemed to be the back see-through. It has a lot of LEDs in it that flash up, so you can get notifications, which is really useful when your phone's in your back pocket, and you're walking along and those LEDs are turning on, and you're getting that notification.
Like
it's really good for one thing, though, draining your battery faster.
Draining your battery. And the other thing is, apparently, it's a word I'd never ever come across before, but it doesn't have any bloatware. Apparently,
you've never heard bloatware before?
No, I never heard the word bloatware. Bloatware
those were true on Dell laptops. You would buy a Dell laptop, it'd be loaded with junk.
Well, it's a dig primarily at Samsung, because Samsung phones have got a lot of Samsung software on them, which is all shite.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that is not up to me a big selling point that someone gets this phone and it hasn't got things that have been pre-installed on it. In fact, I think one possible risk is that people get it and they spend their first few hours downloading shit so they've got something to do on the commute.
Well, shall I tell you another thing that was ironic about this no bloatware thing is another thing they've been pre-hyping was this. Because I don't know if you understood why I sent you that link, because in your story...
I know, I changed it.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I got the brand name slightly wrong.
Yeah. You called it Nothing One, it's a Phone One.
Nothing
but
Phone
it's fine,
One,
totally understandable. But in this Phone One, they were talking about the Nothing OS or the Phone One OS, or however the fuck they branded it, and trying to make out... Firstly, it's a misnomer, because of course it's not a new OS. It's always going to be a skin of Android.
Yeah.
But they were inferring that they'd done something really novel with Android.
Yeah.
And then when they launched it, they went, the good thing about this is we haven't fucked with Android. So it's like, well, which is it?
Yeah. I mean, the cost's low, from what I gather. The starting price is
400 quid.
400 quid. So you compare that to a starting price of a new iPhone, it's quite a lot less.
Yeah.
And maybe
and the industrial
them.
design, by the way, is so similar to the iPhone. It's the sort of thing that Pierre would freak out about.
Have
you seen any comparisons?
Rip-off.
Yeah, it's very similar.
It's an iPhone rip-off with a see-through back. So maybe that'll help them. Maybe that'll help them to gain traction. The fact that it costs so little. But so I looked at the people who did comment on it that I saw. One from an email that came to me, which was Global Data. They have quite a lot of. You probably get a lot of that, a lot of comments on all sorts of things to do with telecoms from them.
Analyst types.
And they were very dubious that it would be able to compete in a market against some of these big brands. And then Ben Wood, who I saw the BBC had reached out to, made the point that, I think they got 144 million. I think the FT put it a bit higher, something like 200 million they got in sort of backing from. And maybe this is one of the reasons he's generated a bit of publicity, because some of his backers are people like Fadel, who was formerly at he was the iPhone developer.
There was also a lot of crowdsourcing. He's got a lot of
but he's got some fairly substantial backers. But it's the funding that they said they'd raised, say between 150 and 200 million, and then you're looking at the budgets of the R&D budgets of Apple and Samsung, which are between 70 and 20 billion dollars. It's like.
They should have focused their efforts on VR headsets.
I just really don't get it. I don't get it at all. I think a device company that's going to really shake things up and make an impact in the way that Apple did in 2007, or before that with the iPod even, which I remember in the 90s getting an iPod, or the BlackBerry. But the iPod, I remember being brilliant when I first got my first iPod, which has nothing to do with connectivity. It was just this.
But that was when we were still getting our head around music on digital files rather than CDs.
It was like, wow, there's this thing that you can.
But that was
the interface that was good.
Brilliant.
But that was Apple doing what it does best.
It's totally new thing,
which is finding an emerging technological paradigm, which is the MP3 versus a CD.
Yeah.
And then doing it better than everyone else, because there were plenty of MP3 players before the iPod came along.
The touchscreen thing that everybody made a fuss about the iPhone wasn't completely new, was it? It wasn't like they'd invented touchscreens.
I remember one,
but they did it a bit better than everyone else. That's what Apple does.
It was just a vertical tracker. It was not a wheel. It was just a vertical slide.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as good.
Quite rudimentary. Yeah. But even the wheel. You think about the wheel now. It feels Stone Age, doesn't it?
It does, but it
was a big deal at the time.
It's so nice to do. It's like I remember holding it, and you could easily get through it.
No, that's always been the thing that Apple's been best at is actually the UX.
Yeah, and when I had that, I was like, I've never had anything like this before. This is so different from the Sony Walkman I used to have in the 80s. When I was a kid, and that's what someone needs to do. Is not another smartphone. Okay. It's a different device type.
I take all your points there, and I largely agree with you, because on my write-up, I think it's so hard as a journalist not to run with nothing. It just gives you so many headlines.
Yeah.
And I think I said nothing special.
Yeah. Fuss about nothing, I think.
Yeah. If I wanted to be Ponzi, I could have gone much ado. There we go.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
So
That's a good
clearly Pierre's the Ponzi one among us, because he got that straight away. But so they definitely overpromised. I mean, the thing is, you talk about we talk about like early Apple mobile devices, but those were different times. I actually don't think the capacity is there to reinvent the wheel with smartphones. They're mature. No. They're as good as they're going to be. The only capacity for big change might be wearables and heads-up displays on glasses and shit like that.
That's the area.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
So what they're really doing. So it's massively overhyped. But what they're really trying to do is say, this is the sexiest thing you're going to get for 400 quid. I mean, they couldn't put that in their marketing because that would be a really lame marketing pitch.
Yeah.
But you can go and get an iPhone or a Galaxy S, whatever.
Nothing better than
for $1,000, or you can get something like what I've got, which is a Pixel phone, but that still costs 700 or 800 quid or something, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
Or you can get this at 400 quid because it's all about price tiers. This is back to my old job.
So basically, they're competing on price.
Yeah, but they're competing at a tier. So there are tiers. This is like when you're a smartphone analyst, you think about tiers a lot. Yeah. And so let's say where we are now, there's the grand tier, the 800. Let's do them by increments of 200 quid.
Yeah.
So they're at 400 quid because I've got my kids some phones at about 200 quid that are perfectly all right. But they're at the 400 quid, and they're saying this is the best thing you can get for 400 quid. Now, whether that will succeed or not, I don't know. But I think that's ultimately their pitch.
But I'm dubious that, I mean, we're in a market now where we have, if you look below Samsung and Apple, which are the two biggest ones, the next ones down are Xiaomi, Oppo.
Yeah, all the Chinese ones.
And they do very, very good phones.
At 400 quid.
At 400 quid.
It's a fucking tough
and now I've not seen one of and it doesn't sound like what I've looked at their pictures of their phones. This is all I've ever based this on, is pictures and reviews, but they look very similar to the iPhone. They use Android.
And the chip's not that amazing. It's a Snapdragon 7 something or other, whereas the dog's bollocks Snapdragons are 8 something or other. So it's not even a top Snapdragon.
People going for low cost phones and thinking, well, I want a low cost phone, but it's got to be good as well. Are they really going to go, nothing's a lot better than this Xiaomi phone?
I think it'll be as good. I think it'll be... I've always said this. When people ask me for advice, I say that you more or less, outside of Apple, where there's a premium, and that's fine, I understand that there's a justification for paying the premium. Outside of Apple, you more or less, especially when you sub-premium tier, so like iPhones and Galaxy S, whatever, you more or less get what you pay for. If you get a 600 quid phone compared to a 400 quid phone, it probably will be about 50% better in terms of specs, slightly better chip, slightly better camera, slightly better screen, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And it's really as simple as that. And it's a fucking tough world to get. How do you go? This thing at 400 quid is better than the Oppo or the OnePlus or the Xiaomi?
The other problem for them is that they've launched it at a shit time.
Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't have predicted this when they started working on this. It's bad luck. But now, to give a shout out to our sister companies, Omdia, I mean, there's loads of people who do this now. You're well sort of connected with the guys who do the smartphone tables and everything.
Yeah, SA and all that.
But Omdia does this as well. And I looked at their first quarter stuff when smartphone shipments went down 13% year on year, and it's a bear market basically. People aren't buying smartphones.
Well, and back to the theme of the podcast, inflation.
Exactly.
If you're going to get a new phone right now, you're going to go down the tiers.
But no one's getting a new phone. No one wants a new phone. No one's going to buy a new phone that doesn't do anything new. You're just going to stick with your old phone and go on a different price.
Yeah, you might sweat the asset, or you might do. When I was buying my kids their phones, I thought, Jesus Christ, my kids would do fine with a 200 quid phone. They can still do all the shit they want to do. On a 200 quid phone as opposed to a grand phone. I'm paying a fifth.
But the thing is, replacement cycles used to be 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah. And they'll be extended, no doubt.
Extended. I just think people aren't going to. This is why the shipments have gone down so much. People are going, hang on a minute, I've got a phone. I mean, I'm not changing my phone for years. There's no way I'm going to change that phone.
That's one thing Apple does well. I'm sure Pierre will back this up. you got a relatively new MacBook there, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
But I seem to remember you had a MacBook that you'd had for fucking ages.
I had
before
it
that.
for 9 years.
There we are.
I had one
So,
for 7 before it was.
I know a lot of Apple users.
I still have it.
Yeah, I know a lot of Apple users who. I don't know if this applies to mobile devices, but certainly on MacBooks, who make them last a fucking long time. So fair play to Apple on that one as well. They seem to last the test of time.
They last longer than, I mean, those things, that piece of Dell junk that you've got there, those things don't last any time at
I've
all. I
had
mean,
this a few years,
that's a fucking
Dell.
dreadful company, by the way, in terms of the length of time its equipment lasts.
Yeah.
Dell, absolute shite.
Well,
I mean, that's just designed.
I've got
to
no
actually
skin
get
in this
people to
game,
have
but
to-
this Dell's been around for a while and it's still functioning fine.
I mean, if I was
So
in
fuck
a
you.
consumer review game,
I
I
put
think
this in a
that's
promo and tag Dell.
that's just absolute bollocks. That sort of stuff. That sort
Yeah,
of
but
equipment.
you've-
It's just cheap crap. That is almost designed to start being problematic after 2 years.
Planned obsolescence.
I
Yeah.
think you're being a bit harsh on them. This has been fine for a while.
I'm not being too
And
harsh
it's
on
still
Dell.
fine.
They sell shit machines.
But you're very. I mean, I remember you bitching a while ago when you had to have a Dell instead of a MacBook.
Yeah, because it's just utter bollocks.
But I'm
It's utter
saying that
fucking crap.
I'm saying that you're bringing some bias into this. That's
based
all.
on experience of owning them personally and having to use them at work.
I'm not saying your bias is completely
And it's not
unfounded.
been one; it's been several.
All right. Well, I think I will concede that Apple is better than Dell, but I still haven't conceded that a 500 quid Dell is half as good as a 1,000 quid MacBook. That's
Well, so he's got 9 years out of his MacBook, and he's paid 1,000 quid for it, and you're going to pay 500 quid for a Dell that's going to last you 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, you do the math.
I've
New-
definitely had
new
this longer than
MacBook
2
Air
years.
You know, you get 9
I've
years
definitely
of-
had this longer than 2 years.
Yeah, but you're now thinking, crap, shit, what's going on with this
No,
computer?
you just want me to think that, but to prove your point.
You get a virus.
It's fine. But anyway, so I mean, back to perhaps we'll wrap it up at this point.
Yeah.
Back to the device thing. They got their work cut out, and to me, the disappointing thing is the hype versus the reality. They're going, oh my god, it's going to change everything, and they've got a few LEDs on the back and some industrial design that's very close to the current iPhone industrial design, and it's just basically like, oh, after all that. And that's why I concluded that it's basically a price tier play. They're saying, yes, it's not all that, but it's only 400 quid. Fair enough. I mean, I'd give it a look. If I was looking for a 400 quid phone now, it would be in the mix.
I think it's good that it exists.
Well, it's good someone's trying.
I mean,
yeah, let's
because
not...
the iPhone, you could buy an iPhone for 400, 500 pounds, but it's
secondhand.
smaller than that. It's
Have they got
new
new ones?
No, the SE.
Oh, the ones they do that are like
Yeah.
last year's shit one, rebadged.
It's just like an old design. Yeah.
God, so you can buy off Apple. You can buy a phone for 400 quid now.
Let me double check. SE. It starts at 470 pounds. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
But it looks like an iPhone 6, 7.
Yeah, but it's
So it's
still,
good then.
but it's still a proper bona fide Apple
iPhone
thing.
6.7's good.
Yeah, they put a new chip in it, but they keep the old design,
Oh,
old
that's,
camera.
That's great.
God, so this nothing has got to say we're only 70 quid cheaper than an actual iPhone.
Yeah, although that looks more like a recent iPhone,
Exactly.
rather than a 6 or
Okay,
7.
fair point.
At a
in
glance,
fairness
you'd
to
be
them.
like,
yeah.
oh, okay, you're still up to date. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I suppose the final point, if their unique selling point is a few LEDs on the back, that's not a killer.
Yeah.
I'm amazed.
Yes.
That phone has
I mean, we've been
the
harsh
same
on
chip
them,
as the
but-
latest iPhone. But it has one camera.
What has the latest?
the SE.
Oh, the SE, right.
But it only has one camera.
Well, only
that's-
one camera.
It doesn't have Face
presumably
ID.
this has. The camera on that Nothing looks exactly the same as the camera on my iPhone, which is
Yeah.
an 11, I think. My one.
Well, because everyone's got access to all the same components. You know, you can't differentiate on components. You can't have your own special little component geezer that you've got in the back
made it
room.
yourself, which Apple's doing.
Well, increasingly, yeah. But Apple doesn't make its own cameras. Apple's trying to make its own modems, but it's failing. But it does make its own SoCs. It does make its own processors. But it doesn't make its own screens. It doesn't make its own Gorilla Glass. You know, even Apple.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trying to. I mean, it's obviously an Apple thing. They want to not be reliant on anyone else at all. That's why they keep getting into litigation with Qualcomm, because they fucking hate the fact that they got to buy stuff off Qualcomm. But making modems turns out it's quite tricky. That's why Qualcomm makes loads of money. All right, man.
On that bombshell.
Yes, let's.
Well, none of this matters anyway because the last section's obviously just disappeared and become nothing.
No, we have levels. We're good. We're good.
Carl Hayes waved his magic wand that he failed to wave at his own fucking phone. Sorry, Carl. All right, man. We'll call it a day there. Thanks a lot for listening. Oh, next week's going to be the last one for a while because then we're all going to go off on summer holiday. There's a guest on it. We'll have a guest. I'm not going to name him because it's always nice to have a surprise. Or her. Or it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't want to get in trouble on that one. No, I just think it's better. Like we were going to have a guest a week or two ago, and then they had to bail at the last minute. So it's better.
The guest is Gavin Patterson.
It's best not to mention him, isn't it? That would be a fucking cool guest.
Yeah. Well, yes.
He'd just come on going.
Doesn't he work for SAP now or something?
I don't know. I don't get track of him.
Salesforce,
right. Same thing.
Well, then it'd be boring. You'd just be talking about Salesforce shit. So anyway, but hopefully we'll have guests next week, and that'll be our last one before summer break. So make sure you join us for that one. Cheers. Bye.